down. There is a scary story about a man who is digging a well when he finds something strange going on at the bottom of the hole. This is inspired by an old episode of Amazing Stories called Thanksgiving, and a classic short story by Howard Rosleth called Hey You Down There. There was a man and a woman who lived on a run-down farm in the middle of nowhere. The husband was a mean and cantankerous old man who took pleasure in making his wife's life miserable. He seldom spoke to her, and when she said anything, he would tell her to shut up. One day, the man was digging a well on his property and his wife was helping him. All of a sudden, the bottom dropped out of the deep hole. The man was puzzled and wanted to see what had happened, so he told his wife to go back to the house and fetch a flashlight. When she came running back with it, he switched the flashlight on, tied it to a rope, and lowered it down into the hole. It went down and down, but no matter how much rope he let out, it never seemed to reach the bottom. The man started pulling the rope back up, but it got caught on something. He started pulling on it, but it felt like something was pulling back. Frustrated, the man gave it a big tug, and suddenly, the rope was almost yanked out of his hands. Eventually, he managed to pull the rope up, but when he got to the end of it, the flashlight was gone. Instead, there was a small white pouch attached to it. With trembling hands, he opened it, and to his surprise, a chunk of gold tumbled out along with a handwritten note, end. He picked up the note and tried to read it, but it was written in a language he couldn't decipher, so he tossed it away. He told his wife he was going into town to buy more flashlights and ordered her to keep an eye on the hole while he was away. As soon as he was gone, she hurried back to the house and rummaged through the cupboards looking for a dictionary. Then she took a big piece of ham out of the fridge. She also grabbed a pen and paper and wrote a note. When she returned to the hole, she put all these items in a bucket, tied it to a rope, and lowered it down. The woman waited for a while, and then she pulled the rope back up. It seemed much heavier, and twice she had to stop to take a rest. When she finally hauled the bucket back up, she was shocked to see that it was filled to the brim with sparkling jewels. There was also another note, and this time, it was in English. It read, "Send more food." She hurried back to the house and hid the jewels where she was sure her husband wouldn't find them. When the man returned, the back of his pickup truck was filled with flashlights. He put a few of them in the bucket and lowered them down, but when he pulled the rope back up, he was outraged to find that the bucket wasn't filled with gold or jewels, just a few broken flashlights. He flew into a violent rage, stomping on the remains of the flashlights and cursing at the top of his lungs. Then, he ran back to the house and fetched his shotgun. And he told his wife he was going to go down into the hole and give them a piece of his mind. She begged him not to go, but he was so furious he wouldn't listen. He attached a big oil drum to the winch on the back of his pickup truck. Then he climbed into the drum. He gave his wife orders to lower him down, and after 10 minutes, bring him back up again. She threw the switch and the man was lowered down in the oil drum. The woman stared at her watch as 10 whole minutes passed. Then she flicked the switch and the winch began to drag the oil drum back to the surface. She peered into the drum, but her husband wasn't there. Instead, it was filled with gold bars, jewelry, and coins. Sitting on top of them was another note, and it read, "Thanks for the meat." The Wheelchair is a scary story about a detective who investigates a murder in an old mansion. In 1984, there was an old lady who lived alone in a 2-story mansion. The woman was paralyzed from the waist down and she was in a wheelchair. She was completely immobile and unable to care for herself. Ever since the death of her husband, she had a nurse who would visit her every day to help with various tasks. What made it even more difficult was the fact that the 2 floors of the house were only connected by an old staircase inside. When the old lady needed to move between the 2, the nurse would have to pick her up and carry her frail body like an infant, up and down the stairs. One day, the police received a frantic phone call from the old widow. There had been a murder. Since police units were scarce at the time and the murderer had already fled the scene, only one detective was sent out to conduct the initial crime scene report. Then, When the detective arrived, he found the nurse lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her arms and legs were splayed out at odd angles, and her throat had beam ripped out. The old lady sat in her wheelchair at the top of the staircase watching him, still and silently, seemingly in shock. He could immediately rule her out as a suspect due to her inability to move up and down the stairs, and because she was trapped up there at the time the murder took place. It was similar to the death of her husband many years ago, who had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs. The detective put on his gloves, took photos, swabbed for evidence, and covered the body until the coroner arrived later, all routine business. He searched every room downstairs, looking for clues, then asked the old lady if he could look upstairs. She insisted that she was upstairs the whole time and no one apart from her had been up there that day. But regardless of this, the detective ascended the staircase, to which she hesitantly moved aside. Beyond the staircase, there was a narrow corridor with 3 closed doors along it. He checked behind each of the doors. The empty bedroom, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. He became anxious as he slowly made his way to the final bedroom where the old lady slept. He opened it, and everything looked normal. A bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table with a lamp. He checked every wall of the room in horror, as it was not what he discovered, but it was what he didn't discover that made him stop dead in his tracks and slowly reach for his gun in its holster. It was a detail so minor that they had completely overlooked it on the last investigation of the husband's death. There was no phone upstairs. The detective pulled out his gun and rushed down the corridor. When he came to the top of the stairs, all he found was an empty wheelchair.